Welcome to the Business of Family podcast, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm the family business survivor and a family business advisor. In this episode, I'll be talking to Chris Delaney again. This is part 2, so stay tuned for this fascinating conversation. Welcome, Chris. Today we're going to talk about the family meeting, and Chris is an expert on this, so we brought him in to help us understand the importance of a family meeting.
Well, thank you for having me today, Tammy. It's wonderful to be back.
Thank you for coming back.
Well, I enjoyed it very much the first time, and you're doing a great service for the family business community by covering these topics. They're very important, and very important to successful succession for families as well.
And Chris, this is the first time in our new podcast studio. So for listeners, we were doing them in our basement before because our office was under construction for so long. It seemed like months, and a lot of months. And we finally moved in. And now we have our own dedicated room.
It's very beautiful, and the sound quality in here is amazing. I mean, the design is fabulous
Thank you. Thank you.
But the sound quality is incredible.
Well, because as women, we want not only do we like it to be functional, but we like it to look good.
There should be an aesthetic, absolutely. Yeah. You got your logos rocking on the wall and everything. That's fabulous.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for coming in. We're going to talk about the family meeting. So let's start off. I know we touch on family meetings a lot because as a family business, that's one of the most important things is to have family meetings or to have discussions. But can tell me, well, how would you really define or say what is a family meeting?
Family meeting. I look at family meetings as being an extension of the requirement for all intergenerational wealth transition, and I just put it broadly, to develop better communication models, because really family meetings are a form of communication. Mm-hmm. And you're making decisions, you're making strategic choices for the future that will affect the business for many, many years, including today. So I look at family meetings as an extension of a communication need inside of a family. And being able to conduct a family meeting takes a skill. I mean, I work with a lot of, as you do, I work with a lot of families. I work with a lot of students in the education space as well. And we often put people together in groups and say, make decisions. Learn how to make decisions in a group now after years of not functioning in that particular milieu. And there's a skill that has to go with it, and this is often not easily picked up, as I'm sure you're aware. So I think, first of all, understanding what a family meeting is important, but understanding what it's essential to doing and what it is you're hoping to achieve. So when I wrote my book, I talked about family meetings as sort of an initial skill set, the part of the abundant estate model. You start off, in fact, I encouraged people to and continue to encourage people to consider starting family meetings early and first so that they actually get to the point that they have that skill down, because the ability to, even if it's just a baseline skill, because the ability to see where you're struggling and where you're succeeding is also part of a successful family meeting structure. And that, I think, is an inception skill set. That's something you should have at the beginning.
Yeah. And you mentioned your book, and can you give our listeners the name of your book?
Yeah, it's called The Naked Opus, Growing Your Family Wealth for the Long Term. I chose a bit of a cheeky title, which in retrospect, I'm happy about, but also, I get some odd connection requests on Twitter. That's how I know they don't know me, I think.
And, when you talked about having the skill set to, run a family meeting. Now, do you think it takes a different skill set, or is the same skill set, but it's different because it's your family?
That's a really good question. I mean, there's a dynamic. So most of the time, let's be honest, it's the parents that are looking at transitioning or trying to get ready for some form of succession, whatever that means. And so we're transitioning from maybe mom and dad to their children, or maybe their children and their grandchildren. And so a family meeting is now changing its purpose. It's going from being, hey, what are we going to do for a vacation, to these are some heavy-duty topics that we're talking about now. And, of course, there's going to be emotion that comes out with that. So, maybe previous family meetings were very much top-down decisions. Hey, we're going to Hawaii this year, and here's
That's a theme with you, Hawaii, isn't it?
Yeah. I actually got some new Olukai shoes on the weekend. I absolutely, it's my favorite place in the world. It's in the book too.
I know, and I hear you talk about it a lot.
If you've been there, if you know,
it's
you
beautiful.
know. Yeah, it's
beautiful.
absolutely.
Just a long way from London.
It's a terrible distance from here. Yeah, but it's worth it when you get there. You know, it's interesting. The last time we were there, which was in the summer of 2023, at the hotel we were staying at, there were several U.S. consultants that happened to be there, and they had taken their family client groups there to conduct family business, and were conducting their family meetings off-site. I mean, literally.
Yeah. You know, and that's what happens when you have family meetings, because family meetings have to be separated. They can't be held at the dinner table.
Absolutely.
And I think with the first or second generation, the family meetings tend to not be formalized, when in fact they should be somewhat formalized, not the formal that, you know, you take them off site. And I would love that for any of my clients who want to have a family meeting in Hawaii. I'm more than happy to attend.
Absolutely.
And facilitate that meeting. But when you're first and second generation, I think that you have to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I found with my clients is they can't run their own meetings, because I know I can't run my own meetings.
Yeah.
And so you could have facilitation skills, but they might not work in a family dynamic. They might work in your office. They might work in your business. But, you know, I struggle with that. I can't run my own to ask my family, and most of my clients can't run their own.
Well, and there's and I'm sure you've seen this, there's a dynamic around the table with, you have to think about the order of seeking people's input as well, because if mom or dad goes first, there may be a feeling that there's an inability to communicate freely, so the children just kind of parrot what mom and dad said, and you lose the real productive potential of an effective family meeting, which is, I think, where someone like yourself comes into play, where you have a facilitator who really allows mom and dad, for example, and that's often who we're trying to empower in the meeting, to participate in a more meaningful way. They get to take off the mom and dad hat. They don't have to referee the historic, generational, issues between their children. I mean, children are always going to be children in the family, but that allows mom and dad to speak freely and without the emotion. And facilitators are really good at structuring that so that the opinion comes across, or the point comes across in the way that it was meant to be heard. And I think that's really important. If you're going to have effective communication, and you're going to have meetings that are a big part of that communication process, you need to think about the process that you have. I remember, just to give you a quick example, and I've made many, many mistakes over the years in this area.
Oh, I've made none.
Wow. Lucky you. Lucky for your client.
I got my fingers, my arms, my toes, my legs all crossed.
I'm one of those people that absolutely has to learn by mistakes.
Me too.
Fortunately, these tend to be, you get skilled at making them low risk mistakes. I was working with an agricultural family, and it was a multi-generational transition that had already occurred. And so I was dealing with 3 siblings. And one of the things that I hadn't really picked up on, was that the home that they were doing their meeting in had this historical gravitas that was actually taking away openness and kind of setting in stone for the purposes of the meeting all these historical interactions that had occurred in that room. So we were meeting in the front room of the parents' house, but now the older sibling owned this house. The parents had passed away. Now the older sibling had this house. They had their Christmases there. All the important decisions over the years had been made in that room. And it was interesting because I'd met all of the siblings independently, and they were vibrant, lovely people. They had very strong opinions about the direction of the business. It was a shared ownership situation. They had very strong opinions. Their spouses were willing to contribute their opinions. But the minute we get back into the room where they'd all had Christmas and Thanksgiving over the last 60, 70 years, they became 8-year-olds again. And they were, and the interesting part was they were very almost reflexively allowing the situation to keep down the true expression of their opinions. So the older sibling was actually getting an unwanted advantage in the communication. They were trying to share, but people just couldn't do it. So thinking about where you have your meetings, I mean, in the book, it's not Hawaii, it's a meeting room in London, but I recommend, that clients look to that at least to get started on these meetings, because you have the power of history in a particular setting is incredible. And even in it's
neutral ground,
Neutral
right?
ground.
So, we strongly suggest that our meetings are held on neutral ground. And, we built our facility, our new offices to accommodate that, because, you have to find a spot that's neutral. Could be a restaurant, could be even your own boardroom in your office still doesn't work, because if that's dad or mom's business, they still, sit in the same spot, they do the same things. And when you go to a neutral ground, everybody's at a level playing field. Yeah. And I remember once just how your perspective changed is when you move. I sat on a board for many, many years, and everybody sat in the same location. I didn't realize that before I came on the board. And after a few meetings, I realized that nobody moved. And so I moved, and boy, oh boy, that was not a good thing.
No.
I mean, I took one spot that was at a corner of a table, and the fellow's spot that I took sat at the point of the table, like wouldn't even sit in a different location, because their perspective. And I think it's really good to change it. And I try to do that even in my own situations, is to sort of sit in a different spot to see a different perspective. Because once you're doing the same thing, you're in the same location, you tend to have that same mindset.
I think that's absolutely true. Yeah. And people around the table organize their input levels, anticipating what's going to come from you, or how you're going to tie it up in a bow, or whatever your response is going to be. It changes the whole free flow of information inside the meeting. And we're dealing with family meetings. I mean, the whole purpose of family meetings is to try to build skill sets that can be transferred across generations, so that you can handle a variety of different decisions of various
and same
complexity.
Page, right? To be on the same page.
It's skill building. Absolutely.
We just had we just worked with a client. There was four in the family, not including spouses, and we did the discovery, which is asking the questions about what they're looking for, what they're thinking about, what they think the options are, what I think has been done, and we had 4 completely different answers.
Right.
And everybody thought they knew what was happening with the business, what was happening with the estate, which was happening with ownership, management. And it was 4 completely different answers. And it's like, this is pretty common when you're first to second gen, right?
Absolutely.
Because we don't talk a lot about it as a first to second gen. We off the cuff say stuff at the dinner table, but I think it's really important that you sit down and say, I just want to tell you what's going on here.
Well, having a facilitator like yourself at the meeting, that's a very, I'll maybe overstate it a little, but that's a dangerous moment when you've got 4 potentially inconsistent and competing views of a potential outcome. I mean, if the family doesn't have the inherent skill set to manage that moment, that could go very wrong. And if mom and dad are trying to manage that on their own as mom and dad and as meeting coordinators, that could be really bad. And having someone like yourself in there as a facilitator, you can let the air out of the balloon, take you're de-risking the decision-making that's there and allowing for a lot of
and we talk about, as you say, communication. The whole point of the family meeting is communication, getting on the same page. So the very first thing we do with clients is we do 2 communication tools, so 2 assessments. And what that does is tell us a little bit about who they are and who they are together. Now, it takes a bit of time to get used to it and adapt it. But for example, if you take me in my 2 assessments, I'm a high quick start and I'm an 8-3 in print, which really means that I have an urgency. I want to do things on my own. I want things to be done and I want them to be done now. And I don't care how it's completed. It just needs to get finished, right? And I can fly off the cuff. I can get anything done without a timeline. Like the less time I have, the better I am.
right.
to get things done. And that's me. But if you look at my family or you look at my teammates, we need to be different, because if we're all that way, one way or the other, I've got families who the dad doesn't want to speak, who's never going to speak, who's not going to bring it up.
Right.
I'm going to bring it up, and it's going to seem like it's the rule. Just from my not necessarily my personality, but how I handle things. It's going to look like, well, I guess she's already made up her mind, when I haven't. So it's understanding the different personalities that start, or the different underlying motivations, or, how you do things, which is the beginning stages to having effective meetings, because then it doesn't seem like it's my way or the highway. Although that's what I want, but I understand it can't be, that I need to collaborate with my family. I need to let them express themselves, be their true selves, right?
Well, and there's preliminary work that has to be done there too, because I think, I'm sure we've both experienced this. Parents are often used to following the golden rule, right? Whoever has the gold makes the rules. So decision is very much...
And that's me, and I have a hard time letting go. But I understand myself and know that that's me, right?
But that has to be managed as well.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a definite loss of power there. But it's not loss, it's a redistribution. And,
absolutely.
And that has to be understood. And I think the other thing, I've encountered a few times working with folks where they feel, or they're worried, that the purpose of some of these training sessions and the work that you do to determine communication styles is to try to retool everyone into one model so that everyone thinks the same. And that actually is the complete opposite.
Right.
You're trying to figure out ways to manage those differences so that they can be allowed to come to the fore, I think.
No, we've made it sound like it's really hard to have family meetings. I want to just say...
there is a skill.
There's a skill, but it's so important. And, you can take them one step at a time. Like the first family meeting we have is just setting up the ground rules.
Yeah.
How do you deal with conflict? What happens if you disagree? Kind of like having your prenup, or, so you're all in agreement before something bad happens. You don't want to make the rules when somebody's already upset. You say, look, if there's a tie on this, how do you want to break the tie? How do you want to go around the room letting people have their say? Every family's different and every rule is different. And, my part in some of that, when I know they're overstepping and I'm to come in and sort of prevent it, sometimes it's a look from me that says, okay, just give me a look. Just look at me to say, okay, I've done enough, or, what do you say? So every family sets their own rules so that it works for them. It's not my rule. It's your rule as a family collectively.
Exactly.
Does everybody get a chance to speak first? Is there an order? What happened? Who gets to set the agenda? There's all kinds of things.
Well, and there'll be different types of decisions that you're going to deal with. So I encourage families to start off as their skill building with easy stuff, low-hanging fruit that won't be controversial.
Exactly. That's why the first meeting is sort of, okay, did we get through? We got through a couple of things.
Right.
Now let's look at the next one. What is the next meeting going to tackle?
And a facilitator is going to help the family stay on that track, because it's really easy for them to feel, that was successful. Let's jump ahead to some hard decisions now.
Yeah.
But we see that they're not necessarily ready for that.
No, and there's an order to some of those hard decisions.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can't jump from here to here. Now, and a lot of times when we're dealing with families, they've already made some hard decisions. And now it's a matter of bringing them forward again to say, okay, is everybody aware of this? There's no surprises. Is everybody on board? What's your thoughts? Is there something that needs to be changed? Can we discuss this? Is it cast in stone?
Right.
Because I'm sure you find this, what I think my kids want is different from what they want. They think they should do what I want, but that's not what I want. Right? It becomes like, well, what? I thought you told me that. I thought you said that. No. That's up to you.
We struggle to choose Netflix shows in our house, and I'll say,
that's why you have different rooms. You go to your corner,
that's why we have iPads.
Yeah.
But we get along. We get along very famously. But it can be hard just to decide, what show you're going to watch, because people don't want to upset the people they care the most about.
Right.
But that's not necessarily the basis of good decision making.
No, and it's not quick. Because again, when you look at different, like I can make decisions very quickly. My husband, for example, can't. He needs time to think about things. So when you're in a meeting, hard decisions are not going to be made on the spot. Yeah. What you're going to do is lob it out, talk about it, go back, think about it, come back to the next meeting maybe with, I thought about this. This is what, my thoughts are around this particular topic. I had one family that it took us 4 years of working to get to a decision on how the business was going to be divided, because there was one child who had never really had the opportunity, and they really had to think about this. And it went back and forth. It wasn't like 4 years of dealing with the same issue. We were dealing with some other things and would bring it up and say, what about this? So you'd look at this option for a while and say, you know what, I thought about it, it didn't work. Because sometimes when you make those decisions, you can't go back, right?
Well, and a lot of these decisions are, I get frustrated sometimes when there's major technical reorganizations occurring and they haven't been structured around an effective family meeting plan, because there's not necessarily a shared vocabulary on something like an estate freeze, for example, in Canada. Yeah. All they see, one person sees power being transferred, another person sees power being transferred to somebody else. Or they just hear the tax side of the conversation. And that,
or entitlement in the business and being a family member. And we've talked about that. Like, there's the family benefits you get by being a member of that family, but there's also the benefits you get by being an employee of that company.
Absolutely. And so a critical part of family meetings is education, is making sure that the topics are understood to the extent that they can be understood. And I mean, we're all educators at heart, but these are complex topics. I mean, explaining an estate freeze to someone who doesn't have any interest whatsoever in that side of the world, for example, or even how a trust works. I mean, when someone says trust to some people, we're setting up a trust, they often think that you don't trust me. And they're not wrong, but they might be wrong for the wrong reasons.
Right.
But there are very good reasons. And once we educate them, we can say, okay, they begin to see the benefit to them and they can articulate that. And then that also helps them understand, as you started off by saying, their perspective vis-a-vis other people that are being planned for in the same structure, so that they get why something was done for them. And that's, so much of the work that I've had done over the years has been around making people at the table understand that this planning is for them and not being done to them. And that's absolutely critical. And that's communication.
Well, interesting. One of the comments on when family working with said, well, I thought I knew what was going on, but clearly I don't, because we're going through this process.
Right, which is not a bad way to think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you want them to understand that the process is for them as much as anything else. And that, I think, is like, I've been in some family meetings where basically a hand grenade was being tossed on the table, and it was like, okay, I don't know how to deal with this. Everyone here deal with. If I distribute this to everybody and the shrapnel hits everybody, we're all injured. So it's not so bad, right? But that's
now we can end the meeting and go to the hospital.
Yeah, we can all go to the hospital. We have equivalent injuries, but that's not actually a good way to do it. And some topics are inherently filled with risk. There's an historical risk, but there's also a structural risk afterwards, where it's really, really important to have people on board, as you said, at least with understanding the purpose. Because some communication can come after the fact. I think that's fair to say. But we want to make sure that the critical comprehension is there, because what we're trying to avoid is conflict that can't be resolved.
Absolutely. And families, blowing apart and not ever coming back together because they didn't realize what was happening. Anyway, I think we're out of time for today, but man, oh man, this is a topic we could have another whole session on podcast just on family meetings. There's so much to learn about family meetings. Anyway, so what's your final piece of advice for first and second generation families that are considering transitions, whether that be to the family, to a stranger, or, to an employee? Because you have to have a family meeting regardless, right? What's your advice? What's your advice to any first to second gen?
Well, a lot of times you will hear people say, oh, these are soft skills, and then it ends up getting diminished. And I think you would agree, soft skills, soft problems that aren't dealt with very quickly become hard problems. And anything that's infused with emotion has an irrational component. I mean irrational simply by it's emotional. It's very hard after the fact to detoxify that situation.
Yeah, it's hard to put the horse back in the barn.
It's out. And it's got the saddle on it. And somebody else saddled that horse, not you. And so we want to make sure that we're the ones who are saddling the horse as much as possible so that you can hop on and actually ride the darn thing. I would just say don't diminish the importance of communication. And family meetings are a critical part of effective communication. And communication is the very core of effective decision making. And if you think about what estate planning is, and you think about what family business succession is, it's all about making good choices, choices that will survive the torrents and the winds that will hit it for sure. But we've got that strength and that resilience baked into
and
it.
You're all in agreement.
Well, we as best as we can.
Yeah. I guess maybe not in agreement. You're all in alignment. You know what's happening.
You see where the direction
because you're going to have to give and take.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's life.
I didn't agree with that for, the first 40 years of my life, but I've learned.
We're all evolving. Yeah. I like to think.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much again for coming in, Chris. And again, we will put your book information in the show notes, and people can hopefully buy it and read. It's a really good read, by the way. It's a nice story. I like it.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for coming in.
It was a pleasure, Tammy. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm Craig Linton from Norquay Developments. Until next time, keep it in the family.
If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find BlueRoots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.